improving the barrier, switching these off, or downgrading this response. This leads to swelling, and this leads to pain. And I want to talk a little bit later about pain and the quality of life. You heard about EQ yesterday. If you can't bond with your baby, the long-term implications in allergy are huge. And I think people forget the implications it has on a family in a condition that everyone says, oh, it's going to get better, don't worry about it. And we're now coming to positions where we classify GI allergy into different groups. The FPIEs, which the allergists love because it has an immediacy to the food. The ones the gastroenterologists love because it's poor weight gain, but actually this is quite a rare event. And this presents with reflux, but like what I said, is I really like lower bowel symptoms going with upper bowel symptoms to convince me in the older, over 12 weeks, where colic's not so common and night waking is common, that these children are more likely to be related to cow's milk allergy. Proctocolitis, and I urge you to read the EARCI position statement, because worldwide, bloody stools is managed very differently. The US often leave them alone. The Europeans, the Brazilians, and the Southeast Asians like to treat them. And then you get these emerging conditions where you get poor reflux and eosinophilic esophagitis and all the emerging conditions. So there's a spectrum. And see, these have eosinophils, these can have eosinophils and mast cells, so can these, and so can these. Why we respond in different ways, we really don't understand, and we're still stuck at the non-diagnostic descriptive phases in cow's milk protein allergy. Oops, sorry, it's really sensitive. I just wanted to spend a second on FPIEs. We're doing surveys around the world at the moment, and we're doing one in China, where we're looking at this condition and its frequency, where it's like anaphylaxis, but it's a GI disorder or it's a gastro disorder in which these children become shocked. They have a cytokine storm. Remember, I showed you that amplification response, and it's quick, but they also get lower bowel symptoms as well. So emerging disorders in the world of allergy that people recognize that foods trigger symptoms quite quickly. And that mum who we approached, who put that video on YouTube, her child was exactly like this. And actually what she told us is that when she gave her child that food, the milk challenge, and put it on YouTube, her child actually ended up in the accident and emergency department shocked. So I don't know if any of you know George Dutoit, who I work with closely at St. Thomas's Hospital. This is one of the most famous allergic pictures anywhere. Everyone's got this picture. It must be copied, downloaded, and everything else. And when you listen to a person who's an allergist present, they keep talking about this side. They'll talk about barrier breach, antigens going through, dendritic cells recognizing antigen presentation. They'll talk about lymph nodes. They'll talk about good and bad inflammatory processes, Th1, Th2, and all this kind of complexity. But they never point to this side until the LEAP and other studies came along. And they're suddenly saying, oh, this word microbiome, and the gut's become the big player now in terms of, and Roberta will talk more about this later, but they've suddenly said, oh, maybe we should give antigens through the gut into the biggest immune system in the body, where 70% lies, and you're getting recognition, and then you're getting memory cells and what we call tolerogenic pathways to induce tolerance. So this is sensitization, and this is tolerance induction. So this really, really famous picture, actually, now people are beginning to think differently, and I just want to bring up PPIs here for a second. The other thing, if you go and look at Nature Communications in the last month, started talking about what happens when you knock out acid in the stomach is you don't digest your proteins properly. And if you don't digest your proteins properly, you're going to present bigger antigens, and you're going to lead to an immune response. So the other thing is not just infections, you have an increased risk of cow's milk protein allergy. So you can see almost every experienced gastroenterologist doesn't like PPIs. We're not fans. And the recent cancer scares with H2 blockers and everything else, I think the repositioning of PPIs is going to be really important as we go forward. I think one of the talks that I can't attend is on Gaviscon and stuff like this. It's just thinking about, are PPIs worth it? But the problem is, is you can get your eczema and you can cream it and cream it and cream it and block and prevent sensitization, but you can't cream the gut. Unless you're Roberto Canani, where is he? He's not around. He can cream the gut much better, and he can talk about it later. And this is about microbiome and short-chain fatty acids and using various strategies to try and protect that mucosal barrier. So what about diagnosing? We're clinicians, yeah? We don't have an objective test. Yeah, we don't have a blood test or a stool test or a skin prick test, and that's the problem in cow's milk allergy. We don't have a diagnostic test. So when you don't have a diagnostic test and you have to rely on guidelines, you end up with this plethora of guidelines. There's Espegan, there's the UK with the NICE guidelines that we're involved in and the updates about food allergy. And then you have expert position statements from the Americans, and then the World Allergy Organization updating its guidelines. Then something that a bunch of friends really got together. So me, 5 of us initially, and then 7, and then up to 12, all around the world, who are people just sitting there in front of patients and saying, this is cow's milk. It became the MAP guideline that I was heavily involved with. I'm going to talk a little bit about MAP because, as Jeff mentioned earlier, it is now the most downloaded guideline in milk allergy, and you're watching national guidelines being built together. And I know with the Thai guidelines, you've got experts coming in from eczema, gastroenterology, allergy, so, multidisciplinary teams making guidelines. But the problem is guidelines are there, but no one follows them. Yeah? So you need practical guidelines. So this was created and updated, and Karina Venter, who's going to be working with RB quite closely in the coming future, we created this thing called the International Milk Allergy Primary Care Guideline. Just to show you what it looks like, or just some background, is that firstly, it's international. Every single continent in the world was covered. Yeah, so we're ranging from the Chinese, the US, the Brazilian, so South America, and it had no funding. Yeah, there's a lot of criticism about guidelines being funded by industry. Industry should stay independent of guidelines, but support in terms of making sure you can get experts together is really important. Oops, sorry. I've got dead. Oh, that way. So MAP was open access. It was allowed you to download, so that's a lot of downloads. Yeah? And see? There we go. And it's validated. So most guidelines are sitting there, and I'm going to show you how we validated the guideline in a country that's called Northern Ireland. It's actually the problem with Brexit at the moment, because if you look at Brexit and Northern Ireland, it's all about the barrier between Southern Ireland and Northern Ireland that's causing all the fuss for our Prime Minister. And he argues no better than Donald Trump does. And this is what the guideline looks like. It's a single page, yeah? Free to access. It describes the various sort of issues around mild to moderate cow's milk allergy, severe cow's milk allergy, and these are non-IgE versus IgE. The only consistent symptom that is on every guideline is this one for severity, faltering growth. And I'm going to talk about when you should be using amino acid formulas for severe conditions versus milder allergies in which you should be using extensively hydrolyzed formulas. And the rationale and the thinking will be in more depth with Roberto later. And the guideline is not just a guideline. The second page of the sheet is actually practical advice, breastfeeding, symptoms in the 0.5% I mentioned, and where you should follow through if you suspect cow's milk, where you should be re-challenging, and it's simple to use, it's easy, and actually same with mixed, and you should be using extensively hydrolyzed formulas first, and only amino acid when there's severity or if there's a problem. So just a 2-page guideline, that's all it was. It wasn't a big document, it wasn't a learned document, just practical advice. The other thing it did is it introduced tolerance. Yeah, we wanted to make it easy for parents. We wanted to say, well, when you approach the age of a year, which some, not all, some will start showing tolerance acquisition. Could we give you baked milk protein by having muffins and cookies? Heated milk protein, Parmesan is really fascinating because not only does it taste good, it's extensively broken down in terms of formation. And then raw milk and see. So mums and dads find this very easy to use, and now this has gone global, in which there are variations across the world. So it wasn't just about diagnosing, it was also about reintroducing. And this separately is taken off the guideline and is downloaded everywhere. Just have a look at the Facebook pages on cow's milk protein allergy, and this is all over it, and see. So how do we improve diagnosis using these guidelines? Back arching, stiffening, irritability, and all the rest of it. So what I would urge you to do is that these babies that are back arching, stiffening, posturing, blood, stools, and they've got loose stools, is not teach your colleagues, because you're the experts, is to actually teach them about other conditions. Because what they find difficult is not cow's milk protein allergy, it's what it gets confused with. Yeah? And what they get confused with is lactose intolerance. And John, you alluded to it, is have you ever seen primary lactose intolerance? There's a tiny bit of Latvia and a tiny bit of Finland in which you have this rare homozygous condition that's lethal. Yeah? So we don't see it. And you shouldn't be diagnosing lactose intolerance in children who are under the age of a year, ever, unless it's post-infectious or secondary. And as he said, it doesn't cause the back-arching stiffening and the screaming that you see in babies that we'll talk about in a bit. The colic. I have a 12 to 14-week rule.